All right, it's time to put all of our knowledge into action by building a project together. And we're going to use everything we learned about Flexbox to build a pricing table. You've probably seen pricing table out on the internet before. It's usually 3 categories, small, medium, large, and it shows the customers which features they'll get based on which tier they're going to subscribe to. This is pretty much what we're going to build, although a little bit simplified. And the great thing about our version, because we now know about Flexbox, is we can make the width of each of these pricing cards change dynamically based on the width that's available. And we can also make it responsive in the way that when the window goes below a certain size, it actually stacks these vertically rather than having them horizontally. You should have enough knowledge now to be able to complete this project. Go ahead and download the starting files for our pricing table project, extract it, and open it up inside VS Code. Now, once you're here, I want you to go ahead and look inside the index.html and show it in preview. You can see that we've got all of the HTML for you, all of the text and all of the boring parts out of the way. But in the CSS, it's a little bit lacking. The only thing I've done is I've applied a Google font called Sono, and it gives it this fun styling for our font. Now, what you're aiming for is determined by the goal large. So this is what it should look like when it's large in terms of the width of your screen. And when the width of your screen is small, this is what it should look like. Have a think about how you might do this, how you might apply the different types of CSS styling. So things like background, or maybe a corner radius, or maybe getting rid of borders around the buttons, or thinking about how you might use Flexbox to achieve this kind of transition from large width to small width, and see how far you can get. Again, remember this is a project, so it's totally up to you. You don't have to style it like this at all. You can style it however you like. But the most important thing is our Flexbox aspect. I want you to make sure that these items are inside a Flexbox so that they adapt to the width and they're responsive on mobile in this case. So when the width is very small, they get stacked up one on top of the other. That is the very simple criteria. Everything else is totally up to you. Now, there's one hint I'm going to add in here, which is a media query. And I want you to think about what can you do using a media query and Flexbox to achieve this type of responsiveness. Pause the video and give this challenge a go. Once you're done, you can come back and I'll run through my solution with you. But remember, your solution is as good as mine as long as you're happy with it. The important thing is to apply the skills that you've learned. So pause the video, give that a go now. All right, I'm going to walk through my version of this pricing table that's in the solution.html, and I'm going to walk through the code one section at a time. The first section is our pricing container, and this basically just applies Flexbox to each of our container items, makes it justified to the center, so that's all grouped towards the center, and gives it a little bit of a gap between each item, and sets the height of the pricing container. And then when we set the justify content to center, align items to center, and the height of this flexible container to full height, so 100 vertical height, then it's going to make everything centered vertically and horizontally. This is a really easy, almost cheats way of centering anything vertically and horizontally. You might know this, you might not, but using just a normal HTML, a normal CSS without Flexbox or Grid or one of the other frameworks is actually not that simple to set something to the middle of the screen. So this is an incredibly easy way of achieving that. And I hope by this point you understand why it's able to do that. The next thing we're going to do is to set our pricing plan. Our pricing plan corresponds to each of the items in our container. And what I've done is I've set the flex to 1 so that they are equal in width. and that they are allowed to grow and shrink. I've set the maximum width to 400, and this is probably a little bit easier to see on the full width screen. So that means that they don't go all the way. And by setting that maximum width, basically I'm saying each of these cards should limit themselves to that 400 pixel size so that they don't take up the full width, and then our centering kind of becomes moot because it's taking up the full width. And I think this just looks a little bit better in my opinion. And that's achieved using the max width. Now I've added a little bit of padding inside each of these boxes just so that they're not right up to the edge on all the sides, and I've added a sort of grey background colour to differentiate it from the background. I've given it a border radius of 5 pixels, which just makes these corners a little bit rounded, which I think looks nice, and I've aligned the text to the centre. The next 4 sections are pretty much all just for styling. Let's go ahead and talk through each of them. The plan title I've made super large, so I increased the font size, made the font weight bold, and also set a little bit of margin at bottom to move everything away from it so that it's not sticking right next to it. This is all personal preference. It depends on your eye. Whatever you think is right is right. And then I've set the plan price to an even bigger size so that it's really stand out, tells people what it's all about. Set it to bold, also gave it a little bit of margin at the bottom. Then I've set the plan features, and this one you might remember from previous lessons, you might not, you might have to Google for this, but essentially what it does is it gets rid of those bullet points. Because we've got a unordered list here, and list items by default have the bullet. If we set that list style to none, it gets rid of it, which is really nice. Then I've set the padding and margin to get rid of the default padding and margin to get them all closer to each other. And finally, I've added a small margin bottom at the bottom of this section so that it pushes the button down a little bit. And then I added some styling to the button, which turns it orange, makes the text white, makes the border 5 pixels to have the curved edges, and then I got rid of the border, which is this sort of black or grey default thing, which I don't really like the look of, so I can set that border to simply none. Now, the final thing, which is quite interesting, and I don't know if this is something that you actually realized you could do, but this combines a lot of the things that we learned previously, which is the use of a media query. I said that when the width of the screen is under 1250 pixels, I'm going to target the pricing container, which remember is our Flexbox container. And instead of having the flex direction be a row by default, I'm going to change it to have a flex direction of column. And what that does is when this gets under 1250 pixels, then it goes into a vertical Flexbox, which is really nice. It makes more use of the space. And I've set that height to 100% because remember previously we had the height set to 100 viewport height, which means the height of our container is going to try and be as high as our viewport, which is only the space that we have here. Now, because we have more content than viewport height, it's actually better to set it to 100% so that it's not limited. And I'll show you what happens if I don't have this. You'll see that it's actually not quite right. When you scroll to top and the bottom, it actually cuts off a bunch of stuff. That's the one final sort of modification that I've got. I hope you managed to get somewhere close to this, and if not, don't worry. Be sure to review some of the previous content like the lesson on media queries or the lesson on Flexbox sizing, and just make sure that you understand at least all of the code in the solution code and you understand what's going on. It doesn't matter if you didn't manage to style it exactly the same. You know, a lot of this stuff is kind of personal preference, and maybe you've made something that's even better than what I've got here. If you have, be sure to share a screenshot in in the Q&A section. I would love to see what you guys have created. That's all from me for this section, and I'll see you in the next section.